Welcome to the Ambulance World podcast, where we are making global EMS connections. Ambulance World is the only website dedicated solely to the practice of emergency medical services across the globe. Now here is today's broadcast from the Ambulance World International Headquarters in scenic Cherry Hill, New Jersey.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the AmbulanceWorld.com podcast, broadcasting from our international headquarters here in scenic Cherry Hill, New Jersey in the United States. And if anybody knows Cherry Hill, New Jersey, it's a pretty nice suburban sprawl, similar to a lot of other suburban areas in the northeast part of the United States. And kind of excited. By the way, I haven't introduced myself formally. My name is Evan Fewer. I'm a paramedic for about 20 years, and if you listen to some of the other podcasts, you'll know a little bit about my history. Spent a lot of time overseas, either working as a paramedic or as a trainer in EMS, doing a lot of EMS training domestically here in the United States, and trying to share some experience. And I want to make an introduction to you guys. This is a pretty cool podcast we have today. It's Derek Rowe. Derek is somebody who I've known for a while now. I've done some projects with him in the past. Derek is a UK-based paramedic. He's been doing this well over 30 years. He started off in his younger days, 20 years in the British military as a pilot who was cross-trained as a CASEVAC medic, which is a casualty evacuation medic, which made it a logical transition when he left the Army, became a paramedic, and he's got 20 plus years in at London Ambulance Service. He's currently with the Welsh Ambulance Service, and he's involved with the preparations for the upcoming 2012 Olympics, which are starting in the next week or two. So if you're listening to this podcast 3 years from now, you can kind of figure out the timing of this. So he's going to so Derek's going to be sharing with us insight to what EMS is like in the United Kingdom, and he actually has a lot of international experience. He spent plenty of time in the United States. His wife is American. He's intimately familiar with the U.S. EMS system, so he's going to kind of compare and contrast the different systems, talk about things that are different and similar. And there's actually a lot more similarities than there are differences between the UK system and a lot of the other Western systems, whether it's Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, US, Canada. But one of the things that he's going to discuss in detail, he's going to give us actionable insight to how to get a job as a foreigner in the UK. So if you're coming from the United States, Canada, Australia, you're interested in working in the UK as a paramedic, he's going to tell you about what kind of jobs are there, how to do them, and it's actually something that's a realistic possibility. And the difficulty is a lot. If you want to come from outside the United States to work in the U.S. as a paramedic, the immigration laws make it very difficult. Not quite so difficult in the U.K. And he's going to talk about how to do that, how to find the jobs, how to get reciprocity for your credentialing elsewhere, and how to go about doing that if that's something you want to do. Kind of neat stuff. And that's it. So I'm going to put you over to Derek. So thanks. Okay, everybody, welcome aboard. And we have Derek Rowe here. He's kind enough to join us and share. He's from the UK in Wales right now. He's going to share some of his experiences in emergency services in the UK with us. So, Derek, welcome aboard. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, well, Derek, maybe you could, for our listeners, maybe introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us about your history. That's it.
Okay. Well, hello everybody. As Evan says, my name is Derek Rowe. I'm presently a paramedic in the Welsh Ambulance Service in Wales. Prior to being here, I was with the London Ambulance, and since 1993, a very big city, as you can imagine, and London Ambulance Service as a whole they boast 5 million 999 calls. 999 is the equivalent to 911. 5 million calls per year. Obviously, those calls are filtered and triaged, and the number of ambulances dispatched are probably about 10 to 15% of that figure. However, saying that, it was a very busy day. In a 12-hour shift, we would normally deal with about 15 to 20 jobs. And the reason we could do that was London Ambulance used to keep their trucks within their own area. They very rarely sent them outside the area. And a typical area in London for a station would be about 4 miles. Down in Wales, it's a little different. In a typical 12-hour shift, we might only do 8 to 10 jobs, but then that's because the distances we travel are greater. I mean, I've responded to 999 calls, red emergencies, 50 miles away.
Wow.
And of course, we've got to take them back to the hospital, which could be the same 50 miles. We've got 4-year-old trucks with 300,000 miles on them. So that gives you an idea of the difference between the two services. London is obviously very urban, big city. Wales is very rural. A lot of countryside between towns and hospitals. Prior to the ambulance service, I was in the British Army, where I was a helicopter pilot, 17 years. And one of our primary roles in aviation was what I think you Americans refer to as dust-off. We refer to as CASEVAC. So I was trained as an air medic, as well as a pilot in the Army. And that's really, I guess, why when I left the military, I went into the ambulance service. It seemed like a natural progression. So that's a little bit about my background.
Wow, that's a heck of a resume, though. Let me ask you. So you were as a pilot. In the Army. You were cross-trained as a medic. So if your primary responsibility still was to fly the aircraft, is that correct?
Yeah, I was a pilot. I predominantly flew a utility helicopter called a Lynx. I don't know if you've heard them. I guess, if I were to say it's the equivalent of the American Black Hawk,
Okay.
I would be stepping outside the boundaries a little bit, because the Black Hawk is wonderful and Gucci, whereas the Lynx is, interesting. So, 2 crew operated, 2 pilots operated, and we would take 1 crew member with us in the back. But if we went and picked up 4 or 5 casualties, which we refer to them in the Army, in Civvy Street, they're called patients, of course, then, one of the pilots would fly the helicopter, and the other would go in the back and assist.
Oh, okay. Now, when you ended up leaving the Army and decided to go into civilian emergency services, what was the training like to make that transition?
The training in the British system is very robust, and I think where it differs between Britain and America is, here in the United Kingdom, we join an ambulance service and they train us. Now, they train us under a national system, which we refer to as JR Calc.
Okay.
And so that's our guidelines. However, similar to America, each ambulance service, each region has different protocols. So, it's a matter of interpretation of what we call JR Calc. We start off on a basic EMT course, which is 14 weeks in the classroom, and quite hectic, very robust, very busy, Monday to Friday. Usually it's you live on the complex, start early in the morning, finish late at night. So they go through theory, and then they go through mock-ups and things like that, scenarios. After the 14 weeks, and it's tested every week. So at the end of every week you have a test. If you fail, you get a resit, but eventually you get thrown off if you're not up to the standard. But you've got to pass the end of the week test to progress on to the next week, and so on and so forth.
So, so this was for the basic level ambulance attendant training. This was 14 weeks?
Yeah, yeah. At the end of the 14 weeks, we then do a 4-week driving course.
Okay.
Now, the driving course is run by the police force. So we do the police roadcraft course,
okay.
Which is what, and we're taught by police instructors. And the first 2 weeks is driving high performance cars and learning how to drive properly. The third week then is driving a bigger vehicle, such as a minivan, that sort of size, to get used to driving a bigger vehicle under the same conditions. And the fourth week then is driving an ambulance, a truck. At the end of the training part, we go to our stations, where we do a 1-year probation period, where we're tested at the end of every month. We're also tested at the end of every 3 months, so a different type of exam. So monthly, quarterly, and at the end of the year, then we have to do a final exam to get a tick in the box as an EMT. So for EMT, it's a year and 14 weeks training.
Oh, okay. So now, is that, if you were to compare that, like, if I'm going to just use the United States as a for example, in the United States there's an EMT basic level, there's an intermediate level, then there's a paramedic level.
Yeah.
So the training that you just described would be comparable to which one of those levels?
The initial training would be EMT basic.
Okay.
And you would be EMT basic right up to the end of the probationary year. Okay. Once you've passed the final exam, you then move up to, I guess, your intermediate, because you've got a year's experience and a year's tuition, etc. The other thing they do in that year probation, we were affectionately called 80%ers, because although we did 100% of the job, we only got paid 80% of the wages. So at the end of the year, you had a 20% pay rise, which is unheard of these days.
Okay.
So I guess, yeah, after 18 months, really, from start to finish, you move from EMT basic. What we call now, we go EMT 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 as front line. EMT 1 is basic training. EMT 2 is in the 1-year probationary period. EMT 3 is a qualified ambulance technician. EMT 4 is a paramedic, and EMT 5 is what we call a specialist practitioner, so an advanced paramedic, basically.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And are those levels consistent throughout the UK, or they vary from location to location?
Pretty much consistent to a degree, but yeah, they do differ slightly. Some services call their basic EMTs EMAs, emergency medical assistants. So, for instance, I think in the West Midlands area, which covers Birmingham, you've heard of Birmingham?
Yes.
Not Birmingham, Alabama, by the way, but Birmingham in the United Kingdom. Their probationary technicians are called EMAs. So their job, and they get their experience by assisting paramedics. Yep.
Okay. Now in the United States, they're different from location to location. Some areas are primarily volunteer, other areas are primarily career or paid services. Some areas have a combination of services. In the UK, if you're going to be a EMT or a paramedic, is there a mix that way, or they primarily fall into one of those categories?
No, in the United Kingdom, to be a qualified ambulance person, you must be in an ambulance service. And it's, you've heard of the National Health Service, which is our big umbrella for anything medical. The National Health Service governs all pre-hospital EMS. So if we do have private ambulance services, but they don't deal with pre-hospital emergency response. So if you dial 999, you will get what you refer to as a full-time career state ambulance person. Yeah.
Okay. And what would be the difference for the private services? What type of work are they doing?
They wouldn't be allowed to do frontline 999 work. There are services around the country that may employ them for transport purposes, inter-hospital transfers, even doctor's calls. So if a doctor goes to visit a patient and the patient needs to go into hospital, then the ambulance service could employ a private service to do that, which will free up their emergency response resources.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It's similar to the way it is in probably most of the Western world.
Mm.
Okay. So the training, it sounds like it's similar to what it is certainly in the United States, but more regimented probably. Now, once you're out of the training, what's the job like? Now, I'm in the United States. A lot of our listeners are around the world. But how would you compare it to other Western EMS services, from scope of practice to how you work and how you interact with patients? Is it very similar?
The United Kingdom Ambulance Service is evolving, we might call it. Certainly when I joined in the early 90s, early to mid 90s, it was very much what we used to refer to as the ambulance man, where you would turn up in a truck with hardly any equipment and stick somebody on a foldy up stretcher and take them to hospital. You may be lucky and have a D-size oxygen cylinder on board and a number 2 ambulance dressing, but that was about it. Then early on in my career they started introducing paramedics. When I first went to my station up in London, there were, on the whole complex of 3 ambulance stations, there were 2 paramedics, and they were revered. They were godlike people, and they didn't lower themselves to work on trucks. They went in rapid response vehicles,
okay,
and would turn up and speak very technically to us, and we wouldn't know what they were speaking about. But and then it went through a big transition where the health minister, or the secretary of health, whatever you want to call them, decided that pre-hospital emergency care was now going to be paramedic-led. And London Ambulance went through a great big recruitment and training scenario where they wanted 600 paramedics trained and employed. So now, generally, we have a paramedic and a technician on every truck. Sometimes 2 paramedics. Very rarely will we have 2 EMTs on a truck. In the early stages, we would be protocol driven. That is to say, we treated what we saw only. We couldn't diagnose. We couldn't make spurious clinical decisions or anything like that. We purely learned that if this person had pallor, clammy, chest pains, fear of impending doom, he was having a heart attack, and we treated for that. Yeah, we didn't go outside that. Whereas now we work to guidelines, J.R. Kelke's guidelines, and we can, to a degree, diagnose and treat. Yeah, we are totally autonomous. That is to say, when a truck responds to a 999 call, the crew deal with that call, treat the person, and either treat and refer at home, i.e. to the primary physician, the general practitioner we call them here, or to another agency, social services, that sort of thing, and ultimately bring them into hospital. We can triage, so when we bring them to the hospital, we can put them in the department that they need to go to. So we have minor injuries, obviously for minor injuries, minor illnesses. Then we have majors, which is for the serious but not life-threatening side. And then we have the resuscitation room for immediately life-threatening situations. So that's pretty much it. We've got medical support and medical backup. We're allowed to give a maximum, for instance, of drugs. Morphine, we can give a maximum of 20 mils.
That's quite a bit.
Sorry?
That's quite a bit, actually.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If we need to give any more than that, we need to call up to get permission from the medical desk, from the clinical desk, who is usually manned by a doctor. We also have a clinical desk, as I said, as well as the dispatchers and the allocators. We have a clinical desk with doctors and senior paramedics who we can ask for advice should we need it. But that's what it is, it's for advice only. Yeah.
Maybe I could ask you about this treat and refer system, because this is actually very interesting to me. So, because in the United States there's a push in certain areas. The terminology in the U.S. is community-based paramedic.
Yeah.
And it's if somebody calls for an ambulance, calls the emergency access number, here it's 911. They get an ambulance, and let's say that their situation is, without specifying a specific clinical situation, they're not so sick that they need to go to the hospital. It would be fine for them to follow up with their private physician the next day.
Yeah.
That you could leave them on scene, make sure that they follow up with their physician, some kind of interaction like that.
Yeah.
But most systems currently don't have anything like that. You basically, either somebody refuses outright, or you take them to the hospital irregardless of the severity or lack of severity of the injury. And there's a push for this, what you're calling treat and refer, community-based paramedicine here, is not to clog up the hospitals with people whose injuries or illnesses don't live up to the severity or the acuity that a hospital needs. But the big concern here is liability with that. How do you handle that?
I guess when you're talking about liability, I mean, we Brits across here have heard about this sort of suing culture, what we call to sue somebody in the States. We don't really have that type of culture across here. If we decide that this person would be better to be referred rather than to take into hospital. Now let's take a scenario here where you go out to a 92-year-old male or female, it doesn't matter, who has various chronic conditions. And basically it's an exacerbation of one of those conditions. The condition is being treated by the GP, the general practitioner, who is what you refer to, I think, as a primary physician.
Yep.
Then what we would normally do, after obviously taking a full set of baseline OBS, a full history, we need to decide, is it going to be beneficial to stick that 92-year-old who is probably going to fall apart any second, quite physically, in the back of a truck and 15 miles in a rickety old ambulance, to be stuck on an ER trolley, you know, for 10, 12, 16 hours, and then to be discharged back home and repeat in reverse? Or should we phone the community nurse or the GP and take advice from them. It may be that when we speak to the GP, they might decide, well, okay, look, as you're there, take him in. Well, that's fine, you can't argue that point. But I'd say 98% of the time, when you discuss a patient with a GP, because they're managing that patient, they will take responsibility for that call, for that particular 999 call that you've been called to. And usually they're quite good. They will attend the patient within 2 hours. Yeah. If they then decide on visiting the patient that they need to go into hospital, they'll book transport for that patient. So what I'm saying here is this liability, if we remain within our guidelines and we work for the best interest of the patient, then we're covered. So any sort of negative follow-up, we're usually well protected. Yeah.
That's awesome. Again, in the United States, a lot of medicine is referred to, and not just for paramedics, for physicians as well. They call it CYA medicine, which stands for, if you're not aware, cover your ass medicine.
Yeah.
It has more to do with the legal liability than it has to do with in the best interest for the patient and their circumstances.
Yeah, I mean we've had a couple of. I won't go into them with any detail, but generally, we've had a couple of instances here where something negative has happened with a call, with a response, and somebody's died or their condition has become worse. I mean, extremely rare these cases, thankfully, where the crew attending are immediately scrutinised. So if there's any death, for instance, or complaint, they're immediately scrutinised and referred to our governing body. So paramedics in the United Kingdom come under an organisation called the Health Professions Council,
okay,
HPC. So we are not state registered paramedics, we are HPC paramedics, which is the British way of saying state registered. Okay. But we're not allowed to put SR in front of our title. We've got to put HPC. And so the HPC then will scrutinise and investigate the call from the initial 999 call to the response of the crew, or the response of the ambulance service as a whole, then the response of the crew and what the crew decided and the outcome of that call, basically. And if the crew did everything in the best interest of the patient, and obviously the other thing we deal with here is capacity. Is that something you deal with in the States? If we go out to somebody who is about to die for whatever reason, if they have mental capacity and they refuse treatment or refuse transport, we cannot take them.
In the United States, it's exactly the same. We have a concept of informed consent.
Yeah.
Which is exactly if the person has the capacity to understand their circumstances, they are informed of all the negative effects that occur, which is by refusing treatment, which include permanent disability and or death.
Yeah.
And they still understand that, and they're perfectly okay with that, and they're still refusing to accept treatment or transport. There's nothing you do. And they call that informed consent. There's another concept which is implied consent, which is if somebody is incapable of answering those questions or understanding it, either by mental deficiency, being under the influence of drugs or alcohol, or they're unconscious because of a medical condition, then you would imply that a normal person would, of course, accept your treatment. Yeah. So there may be somebody who has chest pain, who we know is probably 5 minutes from going into cardiac arrest, who is refusing treatment. What we'll do is we'll stand outside, we'll go into the ambulance and sit in the ambulance outside his house. as soon as he goes into cardiac arrest, now it's implied consent.
Yeah.
That we can go ahead and treat him because any normal person would allow for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's pretty much the same here. Yeah. But the HPC would investigate, and it's their findings that would be the deciding factor, even over the ambulance service, who may bring disciplinary charges, for instance, against a crew or an individual. Yeah.
I'm assuming that's a rare occurrence.
Extremely rare. We had, for instance, again, I won't go into anything here too detailed, but we had a crew who went out to a guy who was under the influence of alcohol. He was drunk, basically.
Okay.
It was a party environment going on. He had friends and close family there. He refused to go to hospital. The friends and family said, well, no, look, it's fine. We'll look after him. We just wanted him to be checked out. Anyway, the crew did everything. They signed all the paperwork. And 5 hours later, the guy had moved from this party to another party a couple of blocks away. And they found him the next morning dead. He'd fallen asleep on his back and vomited and aspirated. Well, they went back to the initial call, because what the service said, the ambulance service, was if the crew would have taken him the first time, then obviously he wouldn't have been in that situation, so he wouldn't have died. But the HPC ruled that the crew did everything they could to try to get the patient to hospital. Now, it got into a little grey area because the crew on scene gave this guy a GCS of 14, okay, because he was drunk. But
so let me speculate. Since he was drunk, and they lowered his GCS, Glasgow Coma Scale was less than 15, which is normal.
Yeah.
They made the accusation was they should have considered him impaired and not given him the choice to accept
exactly that. Now, that was the ambulance service. Okay. However, the HPC ruled that a GCS of 14 under the circumstances could have been a revised GCS of 15.
Okay.
Yeah. And they ruled in favour of the crew, and the crew are absolved. So, when I say we're quite well protected, the HPC does look after people. Obviously, if you just mess up completely, I'll give you another scenario, and it's been on television and the papers across here, so it's not a secret or anything like that. A crew were called out to what you refer to in the States as a frequent flyer.
Okay.
What we call a regular. And this guy, he was in very disadvantaged circumstances. His house was dirty, he didn't look after himself, he didn't take care of himself either physically or medically or anything like that. But they were called out to him for, the 38th time this week. And they arrived on scene, and he was in cardiac arrest. Now, he made the 999 call, okay? So the ambulance is now running to the call, and it was given as a collapse unconscious. Because he obviously collapsed unconscious while he was speaking on the telephone to the call taker. The crew arrived at the house, and oh Lord, it's Bob again, oh yeah. And they saw that he was in cardiac arrest, and they said, oh well, is it going to be worth it? He hasn't got a very good quality of life. No, let's just say that we did 30 minutes ALS and then rolled him.
Ooh, that's a problem.
Now, the big problem was there was a big white elephant in the room, because the telephone line hadn't been disconnected, and the call taker was still on the other end, listening to them discussing what they weren't going to do with Bob.
And I'm assuming this was a recorded line as well.
Oh yes, always recorded. Anyway, so when they called up and said, "Oh well, you know, we've done 30 minutes ALS and he's in a systole and not responding, so we're rolling him." Are you familiar with ROLE? ROLE?
No. Can you tell me about it?
Recognition of life extinct.
Okay.
Okay. We can decide when to call. Yeah.
Okay.
We're not allowed to pronounce death. Only a doctor can do that. But we can recognise life extinct. Yeah. Recognition of life extinct. So they called up and gave the controller all this. They were immediately returned to base, where they were met by two very senior managers and suspended on the spot without pay. And then eventually, after about 4 days, they were arrested after the investigation for basically well, the service disciplined them with gross misconduct. Yeah. And the coroner ruled that his death may have been preventable. Okay, if they would have carried out the proper ALS. And they were sacked, summarily sacked, and charged in civilian courts then, and given a suspended prison sentence.
Well, you see, I don't know. I think it's presumptive to say that their lack of response contributed to his death, but what they absolutely is clear is that they had a responsibility to act. They were acting in the capacity of a paramedic from the story you would take. They were dispatched to the call. It was a responsibility to respond to that call, and there was a responsibility to act appropriately towards that patient, irregardless of what their personal thoughts
Absolutely.
were about that person. And
Absolutely.
They were lawfully required to respond and to act, and just didn't because of their personal beliefs, which is same thing as saying paramedic who doesn't want to treat another patient because that patient is of a racial makeup, which is I don't like that group of people, so I'm not going to treat them. That would equally, in my mind at least, would be equally as negligent.
Well, yeah, I totally agree with you, and we all know, and I'm sure everybody that's going to listen to this knows, that when we've dealt with this person for the same thing for, as I say, the 50th time this month,
right,
you do get cheesed off with it, but you still act appropriately.
Yeah.
There's nothing stopping you being cheesed off with it, but you still carry out your duty of care to that person. And for example, on the other side of that story, we were called out to. It was the middle of winter. It was freezing snow. We had snow here, and we were called to a adult male collapsed in the street. So we turn up, and this guy's lying on the floor. He's freezing cold, wet through. He's homeless, and he's, you can smell alcohol in his breath. And your initial thing is, oh God, here we go again. But, we got him on the stretcher, and I wrapped him up in blankets, took his jacket off. He had a great big heavy jacket, but it was absolutely sodden through. Got him in the back of the truck, warmed him up, took him into hospital, and you're asking him the questions and this, that and the other, and you're filling in your paperwork. And I spent time listening, and we got into the hospital, handed him over, put him into the bay, and he said to me, and he was filthy, this guy, disgusting. He hadn't washed for years, I don't think. And he said, dude, can you pass me my coat? And I will tell you now that I thought, oh God, I'm not going to touch that thing again. So I put my gloves back on, which I'd already taken off. So I put another set of gloves on, reached into the bag and pulled out this coat, which was just humming. and I passed it to him, and he reached in the inside pocket and took out a wallet with a pile of £20 notes about 3 inches thick.
Holy mackerel.
And he took one out and he gave it to me. He said, "You and your mate go and have a drink on me," because he said, "You've treated me kinder than anybody I can remember in my life." He said, "You treated me like a human being." Now, don't get me wrong. I treated him with respect, but I treated him the same way as I would treat any person. I don't think I was particularly nice or kind to him, but I guess it's the way I speak to people. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But he saw it as an act of kindness, where I saw it. It was still going through my mind, "Oh God, he's filthy." Do you know? But you're allowed to think that, but you still treat them like a patient, because they are.
Absolutely. Oh, that's a great story. Let me ask you, from the United States, most paramedics that I know, they work multiple jobs, very long hours, and, I don't want to say that we're underpaid. Maybe I do want to say that. But we work very long hours, we work very long shifts, and to pay just to pay the bills. I don't know any paramedics that are getting rich as paramedics. What's the work to income ratio like in the UK for a paramedic or EMT as well?
Again, in answer to that question, a couple of years ago, as I was saying, the ambulance service here is evolving and sort of modernising. So, as well as the salaries, the equipment that we have is actually first class. It's first rate.
That's awesome.
I mentioned earlier that we had 4-year-old trucks with 300,000 miles on them, but the oldest trucks we've got are 4 years old. And we've now started a new wave of new trucks coming in. So, in fact, we've got one brand new truck again today on station, and we've got one brand new Gucci rapid response vehicle, which is a car. It's an SUV, and everybody wants to work on it because it's wonderful.
When you say Gucci, what do you mean? Is that a brand
wonderful? Absolutely. The way the vehicle looks, the equipment that's on board the vehicle, it's state of the art, basically. It's really a mobile resus room. So yeah, pretty good. The salaries are quite divided, apart from the fact that we haven't had a pay rise in 3 years because of austerity. We've had a pay freeze the past 3 years. But when I first became a paramedic, the salary difference between an EMT and a paramedic was £300 a year, which is the equivalent of about $450.
Right, so insignificant difference.
Insignificant. And back in the early days, a paramedic was considered an EMT with extended skills. Okay, so that was that. So no big shakes. They give you a couple of extra pound a week because you had extended skills. Then they came up a few years ago with what they call Agenda for Change. And they recognised the difference between paramedics and technician as far as skill sets and intervention was concerned, and responsibilities. And of course, that was the time when paramedics became registered.
Okay.
Because prior to that, anybody could call themselves a paramedic, and people often did. Whereas now it's a protected occupation, yeah? And nobody can call themselves a paramedic unless they're a paramedic. So, a paramedic now, let's say a paramedic with 7 years as a paramedic would be on the top spine of his band, yes? I don't want to get too complicated. On a basic 37.5-hour week, he makes a livable wage, but he's not going to get rich, okay? Um, I would say in American dollars, about flat basic, $50,000 a year.
Okay, well that's probably on par
It
with
is about on par, isn't
what
it?
it is in the United States.
Yeah. Um, an EMT, on the other hand, um, struggles. So you would usually find it's the EMT who's got 2 or 3 moonlighting jobs, on film sets or at events and things like that, or stacking shelves in Walmart. Um, I myself, yeah, I do a little bit now and again to get some pin money in. Um, so I guess it's about on par, really, with the
So,
States.
so if somebody now, as far as the certification goes, say somebody from elsewhere, another country, United States, Canada, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, was interested in coming to work in the UK. They're already certified in their home country as either an EMT or a paramedic. First of all, is that a possibility? And if so, what's the process they have to go through, and what are their job prospects?
Okay. Well, the answer is yes. There is reciprocity, um, and I'm going through sort of. I'm at the early stages of that now, because it's my intention within the sort of next year or two to move across to America. Um, now,
Well, I should just say for our listeners that your wife is American, and you have family on her side here in the United States,
yeah, that's right.
which makes it much easier for you to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, one of the biggest differences between me, shall I say, and maybe one of my colleagues, is the fact that prior to him coming to America, to go through any sort of examination or testing as a paramedic or reciprocity, he's got to get a work permit in order to get a job.
Right.
And the other sad thing is he's got to get a job in order to get a work permit. So there's a catch-22. Whereas I'm quite lucky because it's a different path for me as far as the work permits are concerned. As far as the reciprocity is concerned, yes, there is. Now, as I mentioned earlier, paramedics in the United Kingdom are regulated and governed by the Health Profession Council. So it is the Health Profession Council that an international paramedic, that is somebody trained outside of the United Kingdom, would apply to.
Okay.
They have a website which is www.hpc.org. I think that's right.
Okay.
And on there, you can apply to become an HPC paramedic. Now, you're not applying to be trained as a paramedic. You are a paramedic who now wants to register. Okay? And there is an international section where you, for instance, Evan, as a United States trained paramedic, can apply under the international regulations. They would then ask you to provide them with your training records, all your certification, etc. They would then scrutinise that to see, again, as it's the same in the States, if your training is equal to or above that of the United Kingdom. Okay. And if they were happy, then they would register you. Okay? What you would then do is apply to an ambulance service. The fact is you're an HPC registered paramedic.
Okay.
And if you found an ambulance service that would employ you as an HPC paramedic, they would then put you through a conversion course to bring you up to local guidelines. I was going to use the terminology then of protocols, but
Okay.
as I've said in the past, we're not protocol-led anymore. We're guideline-led. So yeah, it's and in fact, I have a friend who came from South Africa, did exactly that. He applied under the international application system. He was granted HPC paramedic status. He then applied to London Ambulance, and he now works as a paramedic in London.
How difficult is the reciprocity process, and about how long does it take?
As far as difficulty is concerned, it's not difficult, providing you have done an approved national paramedic course. Yes.
Okay.
So in your respect as an American, if you're a national registered paramedic, then that would satisfy the Health Professions Council. Yes?
How long does the process take, more or less?
I can only work on as I say, my friend, and he probably took him from his initial application online, okay. Sending all of his paperwork in. It took about 16 weeks. Really.
Oh, that's so 4 months. That's pretty reasonable.
Oh yeah, it's not bad. Obviously, they've got a system and a template that they're working to, and I guess the only time limit, I should say, is however long it takes you to respond to certain questions and to provide certain paperwork, and how many applications they've got going on at the moment to concentrate on yours. Really.
Now, is there a work visa requirement once you go through the certification process?
Yeah, it's a little different, I think, than the States. The visa system in Britain, you must have a work permit to work in Britain. That is to say, you must have the right to live and work here. In Britain, if, for instance, Welsh Ambulance Service said to you, Evan, yes, if you get HPC registration, we will employ you as a paramedic here. Okay. You would then apply to the British Home Office for a work visa, and then there would be that system to run through. I don't know how long that would take. Whereas me as an individual coming to America, I would have to be sponsored for a visa, or I would have to have a skill, shall we say.
Or married to an American.
I was going to come to that last.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, that was my ace, that was. But I would have to prove, or an employer in America would have to prove that there was no American citizen that could do that job.
Okay. Okay.
Now, in the paramedic role, that would be very difficult for an employer to justify employing me when, I guess there's enough paramedics in America to go around, really. Whereas if I was, a consultant brain surgeon with 24 written papers, maybe I'd be a bit more welcome.
Well, there actually is a shortage in the United States of paramedics, and especially a shortage in certain areas, rural areas, especially.
Yeah, yeah. But in my case, we're going through the process now of applying to your Immigration and Naturalization Service. Terry is applying for, or petitioning them for me as an immediate relative, and that process takes about a year, I think, because I'm a husband. So yeah, I think it's a little easier for you coming this way, in as far as the work permit type thing. As far as the qualifications are concerned, I would say, in my experience, that the United Kingdom and the USA are pretty much on par as far as qualification and training. Yeah, I would say the British actually do follow the American system quite closely.
Well, I know that the standard text used in most of the UK for paramedic courses is the Nancy Caroline Emergency Care in the Streets, which is one of the two major texts that are used here in the United States as well. So
Absolutely.
so,
Yeah.
So at least the curriculum is one almost mirrors the other completely.
It does. It does. Yeah.
So I'm actually going to post on the website the information that you've given me about reciprocity and where to apply. So if any of the listeners are going to look for that on the website, and I'll put the links on the website.
Yeah.
Well,
And it'll be good because there's another website. You might have to Google it. It's NHS Jobs. So November Hotel Sierra Jobs. And if you, for instance, Evan, were to Google NHS Jobs UK,
okay.
you would come up with the National Health Service job site. And in there would be menus and drop-down menus, and you'd look for paramedic, and it would give you all of the paramedic vacancies throughout the country.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll post that on the website as well. That'll be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, listen. Last thing I wanted to ask you about. I know you're kind of limited on what you can share. We have the upcoming Olympics in the UK in London, and I understand you have a little bit of involvement with that. I'm sure for security reasons you're limited on what you can share, but is there anything that you can share about the upcoming Olympics?
Yeah, like you say, obviously security is one of the biggest issues at the moment with such a major event going on, and as I'm sure your listeners are aware, Britain has had its problems the same as America with terrorism and things like that. But you know, from my point of view, I've had the sort of benefit of working in London as a paramedic, so I know all the setup, the infrastructure, and the sort of positives and negatives of London. Whereas now I work in Wales, which is quite different, really. But I guess, as far as the Welsh Ambulance Service is concerned, the catalyst for a team called the Hazardous Area Response Team, HART,
Okay.
has been implemented in Wales. It's been implemented in sort of England, I would say, for the past 10 years. But Wales have sort of drag their feet about it because there's no need for it down here as far as they were concerned. But the Olympics is the catalyst now for Wales to become part of the United Kingdom HART ambulance service. And for the past year we've been training up the team, shall we say.
Okay.
And obviously because of the expertise and the training that the HART team has, it will be involved in coverage alongside the security services in the while the Olympics are here. Now, primarily, the main medical cover will be provided by London Ambulance Service.
Okay.
It's within their boundaries and their remit. However, because it's such a big event, it's overwhelmed the London Ambulance Service. They are not allowed to outsource any medical services directly involved with the Olympics.
Okay.
So they've committed their assets to the Olympics while it's going on. Obviously, they then need to cover the whole of London. With what limited assets
for routine calls, you mean, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, routine calls, routine 999 calls. So they can employ, so to speak, other agencies to look after the normal citizens of London while the Olympics are going on, while they can concentrate on the Olympics themselves.
Okay.
Now, I would say really that 75% of what the United Kingdom Heart team will be doing is exactly that, looking after the whole of London while London Ambulance is looking after the Olympics. However, the Heart organisation is a United Kingdom organisation as opposed to a regional. Although it's made up of regional teams, yeah, it comes under the United Kingdom Ambulance Service, and we will be directly involved alongside London Ambulance in looking after the welfare and well-being of everybody that's involved. So primarily, London Ambulance as a service will respond to calls within the Olympics and the Olympic Village and anything directly involved with that. And then the Heart team would be used as a secondary resource and asset for any major incidents or anything that we know could happen these days. Yeah.
That's awesome. It sounds like it's going to be very exciting. So maybe after the event we could meet again, have another conversation, tell us some of the experiences that you're able to share afterwards.
Yeah, it'll be quite interesting. I had fun yesterday. I was up in London, and I was. It's funny that, you know, when you talk about the Olympics, you think about running tracks and swimming and sportsmen and spectators and everything like that. But what I learned yesterday, I guess, you know, it's one of those no-brainers where when somebody points it out to you, you think, oh well, yeah, of course, you know. But until somebody points it out to you, you don't realise that it's not only the Olympics. It's all the infrastructure that goes around and the peripheral services that go around the Olympics, such as yesterday, I was involved, we were down at the BBC,
Okay.
the British Broadcasting Company in London. Well, of course, that's one of the major assets of the Olympics because it's the communication side of it.
Okay.
So we were down, I will say, having fun at the BBC, hoping that in our superhero disguises we would be discovered by some Hollywood BBC producer.
Well, you know, it's funny. Just a quick segue, I guess, towards ending this. When you talk about being discovered by a Hollywood producer, if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of put you on the spot for a minute. That you actually have a very interesting side job that a lot of people would be interested in knowing about as a celebrity lookalike.
I do.
So maybe you can tell everybody who you look like.
Yeah. I'm going to be a bit sort of boring here and say I look like me, okay? But yeah, I've been told by over the past 25 years, maybe 25,000 people that I look like Richard Gere, and I have. I guess it's been qualified because I used to live in the States in California, in a little town called Concord, California, which is up in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. But we took a road trip down to LA just because it was there. You know, why did you go to LA? Because it was there.
Okay.
We went into a nice restaurant to have something to eat, and yeah, it was lovely. It was beautiful. It was expensive, and it took me about 3 weeks to pay it off. But it was an experience. While we were there, a waiter came over with a bottle of champagne and said, you know, and I said, "Oh, I didn't order that. You know, that looks expensive. I can just about pay for the meal." So he said, "No, sir." He said, "It's taken care of." And he indicated across, and there was a group of about 12 sitting at a table across from us, and this head popped around from behind a guy, and it was Richard Gere.
Oh, it was actually Richard Gere?
Oh yeah, it was the man himself. So he came walking over to the table, and Well, he sort of popped his head round and waved, and I sort of my then wife, she's my ex-wife now. I call her the ex-monster, but she fell off her chair. Anyway, he came across and said, "Would you mind if I joined you?" Well, you know, what do you say to something like that when Richard Gere comes over and says, "May I join you?"
Of course.
You say, "No, go away because you're going to steal my woman." So he sat and chatted to us for about 10 minutes. It was like, he's a lovely guy, really lovely. But he said, "Lord," he said, if I'd have known you were coming tonight, I wouldn't have come. I'd have stayed in the hotel room and just relaxed." But it was quite funny. Really.
That's awesome. Well,
yeah.
Well, listen, there's a lot worse people you could look like. So I think if I have a look-alike, probably it's Larry the Cable Guy, the comedian, and that's probably not something I want to brag about. So,
but he's quite big, isn't he? Really,
he is quite big.
I don't mean in stature now, Evan. I mean in you know, he's big over here. We've got him on TV over here. America, as told by Larry the Cable Guy.
Yep, exactly. Yep, he's quite big in popularity and in girth, in size.
Yes. I laugh. I think he's the funniest thing. Yeah, some of the things he gets up to.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, listen, thank you. I want to really thank you on behalf of, certainly of AmbulanceWorld.com and of all of our listeners. You took a big chunk of time, and I want to thank you for lending your time to us. And what I'll do is, if anybody has any further questions, I'll have them contact us through the website, and I'll forward any requests to you. If that's okay.
It's my pleasure, and you know, I'm a pretty international sort of person. I enjoy chatting to people all over the world, and I hope that the website and everything will be a big success. It's wonderful to be a part of it, and please feel free. You know, people might contact you through the website. You might get overwhelmed about it, and if you'd like them to give them my contact details, I'm happy with that.
Okay. Well, then I'll post that on the site then. If it's okay.
I'll sit down and jaw with anybody.
Absolutely. So I'll post your email address and on the site. And listen, and thank you for sharing everything.
Well, it's a pleasure, Evan. Okay. I hope you don't cut too much of that out. I guess my little section will be Derek says hi.
Well, no, I don't think I'm going to cut any of this out. Actually, I don't think we said anything bad, so I think we're good to go. Yeah, so thank you very much for joining us, and I can't wait to hear about the stories about the Olympics.
Lovely.
Thanks for listening to the Ambulance World podcast at www.ambulanceworld.com. Please remember to like us on Facebook and sign up for our free newsletter and updates. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends on Facebook and Twitter. Any questions or comments, please feel free to contact us at info@ambulanceworld.com. Stay safe and enjoy life.